The most watched video on one of agriculture's biggest YouTube channels has nothing to do with drought, debt, or record yields. It's a 10-year-old girl behind the wheel of a combine, and it has over 5 million views. That girl is Isla Johnson, daughter of Zach Johnson, the man the internet knows as the Millennial Farmer. And if you want to understand what has really happened to this family, that video is where you have to start, because it captures exactly what this channel was always about and exactly what now hangs in the balance. Before there was a YouTube channel, before there was a brand, before there were 1 million subscribers, there was a farm in Lowry, Minnesota that almost nobody outside of Pope County had ever heard of. In 1868, a family left Sweden. They crossed an ocean, settled in west-central Minnesota, and by 1876 had carved a 160-acre homestead out of the land. That farm stayed in the family. Generation after generation, it stayed. The soil changed hands 6 times within the same bloodline, grandmother to father, father to son, and somehow, across more than 150 years, it never left. Zach Johnson grew up on that land. He knew, from the time he was old enough to understand anything, that he was part of something older than anything he'd ever see in a classroom. His father, Nate, farmed it, his grandfather farmed it before Nate, and so on. But Zach almost didn't come back to it. After high school, he went to college in Bemidji, Minnesota. Not for agronomy, not for business, not for anything obviously connected to the farm. He studied performance engines. He was a dirt track racer before he was a full-time farmer. And for a period of his life, those two things were pulling in different directions. Eventually, the land won. He came back, took his place alongside his father on the family operation, and settled into the rhythm of crop farming in Minnesota. Corn and soybeans, weather watching, equipment maintenance, the particular exhaustion of a harvest that never quite ends when you want it to. For years, that was the whole story. Farmer, racer, small-town Minnesota guy with deep roots and no particular reason to think anyone outside Lowry would ever care. And then he picked up a camera. But here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. Zach didn't start the Millennial Farmer channel because he saw an opportunity. He started it because he was frustrated. Around 2016, he kept encountering the same thing. Friends, family members, people who had grown up around agriculture in some sense, confidently saying things about farming that weren't true, about GMOs, about herbicides, about how food was actually grown and why farmers made the decisions they made. The misinformation wasn't coming from bad faith, necessarily. It was coming from a gap. Nobody was filling it. So on April 2, 2016, he launched the channel. The pitch was simple. Come watch an actual farmer do actual farming and form your own conclusions. For the first year and a half, nobody watched. That's not entirely true. Some people watched. But the numbers were modest, the growth was slow, and Zach was doing this on top of farming 2,400 acres with his father and raising 3 young kids with his wife Becky. He shot video on the tractor, on the combine, in the fields. Then he'd come home at 9 or 10 or 11 at night, leave an SD card on the desk, and go to sleep. Becky picked it up. This is the part of the story that almost never gets told properly. Becky Johnson, former daycare operator, stay-at-home mother of 3, was the one who woke up the next morning, edited the videos, got the kids ready, ran them to their activities, and kept the whole operation moving while Zach was already back out in the fields. She researched what made YouTube videos go viral. She studied other large channels. She figured out the mechanics of the platform that her husband barely had time to think about. And somewhere in this period, she made a connection that changed the trajectory of everything. She was an avid fan of the Kardashians, not because she cared about celebrity gossip, but because she understood what they were doing. They were bringing cameras into the actual texture of their daily lives and letting people watch. That was the model. That was what the Millennial Farmer could be. She started pushing Zach to post more consistently, more candidly. The SD card ritual continued. The editing continued. The channel grew. Then about a year and a half in, 2 videos went viral back to back. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. When 2 videos go viral for a small creator, the instinct is usually to chase it, post more, ride the wave, see what sticks. Zach and Becky did something more deliberate than that. They had a conversation. He told her, "Let's push for a year, commit to it properly, see where it goes." She said yes. And that single decision, made quietly, probably at a kitchen table in Lowry, Minnesota, is what turned a hobby into a business that would eventually reach more than 1 million people. The content itself was the secret. Zach didn't create a farming show. He documented what actually happened on the farm, including the things that went wrong. A tractor got stuck in the mud, badly stuck, in the kind of situation that could ruin your day and your equipment and your relationship with your father. Zach kept the camera rolling. The video shows him working through it, calmly, methodically, without raised voices or visible panic. It has more than 2.8 million views. That video became something of a mission statement for what the channel was. Not performance, not polish. What it actually looks like when something goes sideways on a working farm and a family figures it out together. The agriculture itself was always the point, but the family was what kept people coming back. Onyx, Rhiannon, and Isla started appearing in videos. Not pushed in front of the camera, not turned into characters. Just present, the way kids are present on a working family farm, helping out, getting in the way, learning things. Becky and Zach made a specific decision early on. Their children would choose when they wanted to be on camera. They would not be required. They would not be props. What that policy produced, organically, was some of the channel's most resonant content, including the video of then 10-year-old Onyx, behind the controls of a grain cart, learning to operate machinery that most adults have never sat inside. That video has over 4 million views. The video of Isla driving the combine, at 10 years old, has more than 5 million. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. There is a version of the Millennial Farmer story that is entirely about Zach Johnson, the farmer, the racer, the straight-talking Minnesotan who turned a camera on his cornfields and built an audience of more than 1 million people. That version is accurate, as far as it goes. What it leaves out is Becky. Becky Johnson was not raised in farming. In her own words, she was raised by people who held the opposing viewpoint, skeptical of conventional agriculture, suspicious of the practices that Zach's family had relied on for generations. She came into the Johnson family without a framework for understanding what they did or why they did it. GMOs, herbicides, the scale of modern equipment, the economics of row crops, these weren't things she grew up around. What changed her mind was proximity. She married into the farm, and instead of maintaining the skepticism she'd grown up with, she started asking questions. The more Zach explained, the more the gap between what she'd been told and what she actually saw closed. This is relevant to the channel in a way people rarely acknowledge. Becky isn't just the editor and the business manager. She is, in a very real sense, the audience. She came to agriculture as an outsider, understood what the misconceptions were from the inside, and that made her uniquely equipped to help Zach translate what they were doing for people who had no farming background at all. She figured out the SEO. She handled the sponsorships. When the YouTube revenue started coming in consistently enough to matter, she managed the business side of the operation, and it became, by Zach's own description, a full-time job for both of them, on top of the actual farming. The channel's business model expanded beyond ad revenue. Merchandise, brand partnerships, agricultural industry collaborations, a nonprofit, a second channel, a gun range that the family co-owns, dirt track racing operations, all of it running simultaneously, all of it intertwined. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Some YouTube creators pivot to merchandise when they hit 1 million subscribers. Some launch podcasts. Zach and Becky Johnson launched a nonprofit. Harvest Outreach Inc. grew out of something personal. Zach lives 20 miles from Millerville, Minnesota, where in December 2019, 2 brothers and their nephew died in a harvester silo incident, overcome by fumes during a rescue attempt, alongside members of the volunteer fire department who went in to help them. 3 people lost, 1 community devastated, and the equipment that might have changed the outcome, grain bin rescue kits, the specialized tools that allow first responders to safely extract someone trapped beneath grain, wasn't there. This wasn't an isolated tragedy. Minnesota and the upper Midwest have consistently ranked among the highest in the country for grain bin entrapments and fatalities. The hazard is invisible until it isn't. By that point, minutes matter. Zach used the channel to raise awareness. He produced a video specifically about grain bin safety. The response was significant enough that he and Becky formalized it, creating the Harvest Outreach nonprofit with a volunteer review panel and a specific mission: get grain bin rescue equipment to rural fire departments that couldn't afford to buy it themselves. By 2024, the campaign had raised more than $100,000. Equipment had been donated to between 60 and 70 rural fire departments across the country. Not as a one-time gesture, as a sustained effort, built through years of consistent fundraising tied to the channel's annual content cycle. The nonprofit also expanded into scholarships, partnering with Anderson Bash, Harvest Outreach began awarding college scholarships to students in West Central Minnesota, pursuing agriculture-related degrees, engineering, trades, and crop science included. Applications run annually. Zach has said, about the grain bin safety campaign specifically, he can say with certainty that it saved a life. That's not a content metric, that's something else entirely. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got. Until now. Here is the question that sits underneath everything in the Millennial Farmer story, the one that the channel's audience senses but rarely articulates directly. Can the seventh generation actually happen? The Johnson farm has now expanded to 3,000 acres of corn and soybeans, run full-time by Zach and his father Nate. By any measure, it is a substantial, functioning agricultural operation. The YouTube income, from nearly 1.2 million subscribers and a full brand business, has added financial stability that most farms of this size don't have access to. But farmland prices in the Midwest surged 23% in a single year in 2022, according to Bloomberg reporting at the time. That trend didn't reverse cleanly. The cost of acquiring additional land, financing equipment, operating across seasonal cash flow gaps, these pressures are real for the Johnson family regardless of their subscriber count. Online income and farming income are different kinds of money operating on different timelines. Isla Johnson is 15. He's already a competitive modified racer with multiple feature wins in the 2025 season, often racing at the same tracks as his father. Whether he becomes the seventh-generation farmer is genuinely unknown. Zach and Becky have said publicly, more than once, the kids are in charge of their own futures. They will not be pushed toward the farm. They will not be expected to continue the legacy simply because the legacy exists. That is a significant thing for a sixth-generation farmer to say out loud. There is real love behind it. The kind of parent who watched his own father farm the land and understood, firsthand, that the work has to be chosen to be sustainable. But it also means the conversation about the Johnson farm's future is genuinely open, not dramatic, not in crisis, just genuinely unresolved in the way that any family business spanning 150 years eventually becomes unresolved. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What they did instead is the part nobody talks about. In May 2026, the Millennial Farmer channel turned 10 years old. A decade of daily farm life, 550-plus videos, 350 million lifetime views, and one family's unfiltered documentation of what it actually costs to keep a multi-generational operation running. At the 10-year mark, Becky Johnson said something that reframed the entire project in a single sentence. She said YouTube isn't something Zach wants to do forever, that it's taxing, that they know all good things eventually change. What she described instead was a longer horizon, something in agricultural media that generates revenue more consistently than platform-dependent YouTube income, not leaving agriculture, not abandoning the mission of farmer consumer education, but recognizing that the current model, as successful as it's been, is not the final form of what they're building. Meanwhile, Zach returned to late-model dirt track racing in 2025, after 7 years away in the modified division. He won more than 6 feature races in a single season, including a double victory weekend in July. Onyx races alongside him now at the same tracks, in a different class, a father and son competing simultaneously in the same sport on the same summer evenings. Between the Rows, their second channel, documents that side of family life. The races, the travel, the moments between the farming cycles. The family continues to set the terms for how much of their private life becomes content, and how much stays theirs. The Alexandria Shooting Park, which the family co-owns, is a 160-acre gun range with 25 trap shooting houses, a skeet field, and a sporting clays course in development. Another operation, another revenue stream, another thing running in parallel with everything else. And on the farm itself, Nate Johnson is still out there. Father and son, working the same 3,000 acres that trace back to a 160-acre homestead established by Swedish immigrants in 1876. The machinery is different, the scale is different, the cameras are new. Everything else is essentially the same problem it has always been. Keep the land, keep the family together, make it to the next season. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. Every family farm that has survived long enough eventually becomes a philosophical question, as much as an agricultural one. The Johnson operation has made it to 150 years by doing 2 things consistently: adapting to whatever economic and technological conditions the current generation faced, and passing the land to someone who wanted to be there. You cannot pass a working farm to someone who doesn't want it and expect it to survive. The history of rural America is full of the evidence. Isla Johnson built something unusual, a channel that brought the realities of row crop farming to people who had never thought about where their corn came from, who turned a grain cart stuck in a Minnesota field into content that 5 million people watched, who convinced a woman raised skeptical of conventional agriculture to become the business engine of the largest farming YouTube channel in the country. What he hasn't solved, what no amount of content strategy or grain bin safety fundraising or late model racing wins can solve, is the question of who wants to be standing in that field in 20 years when he's ready to hand it down. Onyx is 15, winning modified races, growing up on camera and off it. Rhiannon and Isla are navigating their own lives with the particular awareness that comes from growing up in a family that a million strangers follow. None of them have committed to the farm publicly. None of them have been asked to. That's the honest truth at the center of this story. A family that has kept 150 years of agricultural history alive through floods, droughts, commodity crashes, and the arrival of the internet now faces the same quiet pressure every multi-generational farm faces eventually. Not collapse, not crisis, just the open question of continuation. And that question doesn't have an answer yet. What the Millennial Farmer story actually is, underneath the subscriber counts and the viral videos, is this. A family that has been answering the same question for 6 generations. Do we keep going? And finding a way to say yes. Zach and Becky Johnson built something the agriculture world had never quite seen before. They put a working family farm on camera without cleaning it up, without hiding the hard parts, without asking their kids to perform a version of farm life that felt false. They raised money for fire departments. They gave scholarships. They kept the land running while the cameras rolled. Right now, Zach is back on the dirt track. Onyx is racing beside him, and Becky is thinking about what comes after YouTube. The channel is 10 years old. The farm is 150 years old. The 7th generation is watching from the passenger seat of a combine or the pit lane of a modified racetrack, and nobody has told them what they're supposed to do next. The Johnson family has a choice to make about what their future looks like, and it's entirely theirs to make. Here's the question. If you grew up on a 150-year-old family farm, would you walk away from it to build your own life? Or would the weight of all those generations be too much to leave behind? Drop your answer below.